Okay, let's jump right into this. Have you ever wondered what exactly connects a tribal healer in Siberia with, say, a levitating Christian saint? Or even a modern psychotherapist? Well, in today's explainer, we're going to look at how ancient technologies of the sacred, specifically the deeply rooted practices of shamanism, actually form the foundational bedrock for the mystical traditions of Christianity and honestly several other major world religions. We'll uncover how these seemingly distinct paths actually work together. They share this incredible, universal architecture of the human mind to access hidden dimensions. It's an amazing journey into human consciousness, so let's get right to it. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the roots of shamanism. Then, mysticism in early Christianity. Third, the global mystical tapestry. After that, we'll contrast their spiritual goals and finally wrap up with the psychology of ecstasy. Starting right off with Section 1, the roots of shamanism. To really get this, we have to strip away the modern New Age stereotypes and understand what this was at the very dawn of human culture. The renowned religious historian Mircea Eliade famously defined shamanism not as a single organized religion, but as an archaic technique of ecstasy. And that's a huge distinction. It's a universal tool. Through intense trance states, usually induced by chanting, drumming, or extreme physical exertion, the shaman's consciousness is completely altered. In this state, their soul is believed to literally leave the body. It's a phenomenon known as soul flight, and it's used to mediate between our everyday physical world and the hidden spiritual dimensions. And what's really important to grasp is that these traditions survive today not as abstract philosophical concepts, but as highly practical disciplines. Historically, a shaman's job is grounded entirely in the community. They use these ecstatic states to serve their people through hands-on healing and divination. Imagine a village facing a mysterious illness. The shaman goes into a trance to find the spiritual cause and extract the sickness. It's gritty, rigorous spiritual work with a very immediate earthly purpose. Moving to Section 2, Mysticism in Early Christianity. Now, what's absolutely fascinating is how these archaic techniques weave right into early Christian history. For instance, was Jesus a shaman? Now, we aren't looking at this theologically, but purely through the lens of historical anthropology. Scholars point out that to his contemporaries, Jesus' actions, acting as a folk healer, performing miracles, driving out hostile spirits, perfectly mirror the social role of a classic shamanic figure operating within a tribal community. Furthermore, let's look at the classic Christian narrative of the harrowing of hell. This is the story of Christ descending into hell between the crucifixion and resurrection to save captive souls. In anthropological terms, this is a prime example of a catabasis, a classic shamanic underworld journey. Imagine diving into the darkest depths of the spirit realm, facing hostile entities just to retrieve lost souls and bring them back to the light. Dying, descending on a rescue mission, and rising again, that is the quintessential framework of a shamanic initiation. We see this exact same ecstatic trance in revered Christian mystics too. We have Saint Teresa of Avila describing an ecstatic rapture so powerful, she felt carried away by a giant eagle, which by the way is a classic symbol of shamanic flight. Saint Joseph of Cupertino famously levitated during deep religious trance, and Meister Eckhart spoke of breaking through the physical realm entirely to grasp the divine. The psychological exaltation of a shaman's trance is structurally remarkably similar to these documented ecstasies of Christian saints. They were essentially adapting these ancient physical trance states into profound spiritual devotion. St. Augustine really hit the nail on the head here. He wrote, "We have to flee from sensible things and have need of wings to fly towards that light, out of the darkness in which we live." He's framing spiritual growth as a literal flight of the soul away from the everyday world. It perfectly shows how early Christian mysticism operates on a wonderfully similar technology of the soul as ancient magical flight, working together to use the mind's capacity for ecstasy to reach the divine. Okay, Section 3, the global mystical tapestry. Let's zoom out a bit because this reveals a massive, interconnected web of mystical experiences across the whole world. The underlying mechanics of ecstasy act as a shared language across different faiths. In Judaism, the ancient Merkabah, or chariot mysticism, involved rigorous preparation for an ecstatic journey through the heavens to reach the throne of God, a direct parallel to shamanic upper-world journeys. In Islam, the Sufi branch uses rhythmic trance dancing, like the spinning dervishes, to induce altered states. These are completely different cultural expressions of the exact same spiritual technology, all working together to connect the human mind with the infinite. Even in Tibetan Buddhism, we see these traditions intertwining beautifully. The older animistic spirits and techniques of the indigenous Bon religion didn't just vanish. They seamlessly merged with incoming Buddhist practices. So today, you have monks and lamas utilizing rhythmic drumming and intense trance states right alongside traditional Buddhist philosophy to achieve enlightenment and help their communities. Moving to Section 4, contrasting spiritual goals. Now, we do need to make a really vital distinction here. While the internal map of consciousness might look identical, the ultimate destinations are vastly different. A shaman alters their consciousness for earthly, practical reasons, like curing an illness or finding food for the tribe. They're basically a spiritual diplomat for the community's immediate survival. Conversely, the Christian mystic or the Buddhist seeks something entirely transcendent. They want pure enlightenment, escaping the cycle of rebirth, or achieving a permanent loving union with the divine. Same exact vehicle, totally different destination. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the psychology of ecstasy. Let's step into the modern era and see how these ancient soul flights are understood today. Tracing this evolution is absolutely fascinating. In antiquity, the philosopher Pythagoras underwent isolated cave rituals. In the Middle Ages, Dante mapped the soul's flight in literature. By the 18th century, Emanuel Swedenborg documented his own intense heavenly visions. And then, in the 20th century, the pioneering psychologist Carl Jung treated this descent not as a literal map of demons, but as a psychological method for self-transcendence by confronting the deep, unconscious mind. Jung engaged in a profound self-experimentation he called active imagination, which he documented in his famous Red Book. He wrote, "But the deepest hell is when you realize that hell is also no hell, but a cheerful heaven." Jung proved something incredible. Before you can find psychological wholeness or spiritual fulfillment, you must first willingly descend into the deepest, darkest realms of your own mind. You have to face your own personal underworld. Which brings us to today. Modern transpersonal psychology and the neo-shamanism movement essentially strip away the religious dogma of the past. They look at these ancient techniques of ecstasy as incredibly effective, innate tools for deep psychological healing, self-discovery, and inner exploration. The spirits of the past might now be called psychological archetypes, but the journey into the self, it remains exactly the same. What this means for you is that these aren't just dusty rituals, they are innate blueprints of the human brain. So, knowing that the exact same ecstatic drive connects a Paleolithic healer in a cave, a levitating Christian saint in a monastery, and a modern psychologist in a clinic, we really have to ask ourselves, is the quest to transcend our ordinary minds the most fundamental human instinct? And if it is, what hidden dimensions of your own mind are just waiting to be explored? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.